high-level overview. In this powerful and eye-opening episode, Rod Blagojevich, the former governor of Illinois, shares the harrowing experience of his political downfall, imprisonment, and survival, while Joe Rogan guides the conversation through layers of politics, justice system corruption, and personal resilience. The episode carries a tone that swings between anger, hope, humor, and deep reflection, providing both an emotional and insightful journey. This is a conversation that moves between political corruption, the abuses of the criminal justice system, reflections on faith and family, and the spirit of survival against systemic injustice. This is a summary of Rod Blagojevich from the Joe Rogan Experience, where we break down the key insights, ideas, and takeaways from this content, giving you the gist so you can decide if you want the rest. The full summary is available on perfectsummary.com, and you can listen to the podcast Perfect Summary on all major platforms or watch it on YouTube at Official Perfect Summary. The discussion explores Rod Blagojevich's version of his arrest and political persecution, deep systemic corruption within the Department of Justice and FBI, the experience of surviving almost 8 years in prison, including interactions with gang members and pedophiles, his relationship with Donald Trump and Trump's act of commuting his sentence, insight into Chicago politics, wiretapping, and the Obama Senate seat scandal, how the justice system weaponizes power against political figures, his spiritual transformation through reading the Bible daily in prison, harsh realities and human stories from prison life, the broken state of criminal justice and the need for reform, parallels drawn between his case and broader systemic abuses today, a broader critique of political cowardice, media manipulation, and the erosion of American values. Deep dive into main ideas. Rod Blagojevich's arrest and the media's narrative. Rod opens up about how his arrest was framed by the media as clear-cut political corruption, when, in his view, the full tapes and context were deliberately suppressed to railroad him. He describes feeling betrayed by the very institutions he believed were there for justice, and how the public perception was carefully manipulated to label him guilty before a fair hearing. The FBI, DOJ, and the weaponization of justice. Blagojevich details how federal prosecutors aggressively pursued him, wiretapped his phones, manipulated court procedures, and pressured him to plead guilty under threat of long prison sentences. He draws parallels between his experience and what happened to Trump, arguing that a rogue DOJ and FBI have become political actors rather than impartial enforcers of the law. Life inside prison and facing true adversity. He paints a vivid picture of prison life, initially placed in a high-security facility surrounded by gangsters, drug cartel members, and hundreds of pedophiles. Blagojevich shares shocking details about the protection given to pedophiles in prison and how racial segregation structures life inside. His time there forced him to wrestle with anger, loneliness, and despair daily. Discovering faith and spiritual growth. Facing years of isolation and injustice, Blagojevich found profound strength and meaning through deep engagement with the Bible. Reading Scripture daily for 2,896 days, he discovered solace in the Psalms and Gospels, particularly resonating with the story of David and the suffering of Christ. His faith became a bedrock of emotional survival. Donald Trump's role and presidential commutation. Rod credits Donald Trump for ultimately commuting his sentence and freeing him. Trump had noticed Blagojevich's refusal to cave to political pressure years earlier. He draws an emotional contrast between how Trump extended compassion versus how political elites, including Obama, distanced themselves and abandoned him. The broken criminal justice system. Blagojevich critiques the American justice system as fundamentally corrupt, highlighting how prosecutors target political figures for personal career advancement. He discusses the systemic oversentencing of nonviolent offenders, particularly affecting Black communities, and emphasizes the urgent need for broad criminal justice reform based on fairness and mercy. The media's role in manufacturing consent. He and Rogan explore how media outlets coordinate to create false narratives, emphasizing how mainstream coverage often omits context to serve political ends. Rod points to his own experience and broader examples involving Trump to argue that the public is increasingly awakening to these manipulations. Deep state, fear, and the corruption of power. Drawing from his direct experiences, Blagojevich passionately describes how entrenched political and bureaucratic power, the so-called deep state, operates independently of elected officials and manipulates outcomes behind the scenes. Both he and Rogan emphasize the dangers of unchecked power without transparency or accountability. Hopes for future reform and redemption. Despite his suffering, Blagojevich expresses hope for real change, both through Trump's re-election and broader systemic reforms. He discusses aspirations of helping formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society, possibly through culinary or vocational programs, emphasizing rehabilitation over retribution. Final reflections on freedom, courage, and the human spirit. Throughout the episode, Blagojevich repeatedly comes back to lessons of perseverance, integrity, and faith. His story is not just one of political downfall, but of maintaining dignity under relentless pressure, finding purpose through suffering, and continuing to believe in the ideals of America despite its current flaws. That's a wrap on Rod Blagojevich from the Joe Rogan Experience. If you found this summary valuable, make sure to follow, subscribe, and come back for more in-depth breakdowns of content. This summary came from perfectsummary.com, your go-to for podcast recaps, book breakdowns, and video summaries that give you the gist so you can decide if you want the rest. You can listen to the Perfect Summary podcast on all major platforms or watch our content on YouTube at Official Perfect Summary.